Hi everyone, welcome again to Baden Hill, and welcome to the second part of our unit on fights. Now I have to say a little bit more during this segment about fights and why we would want to talk about fights. Fights refers to conflicts within a country. It also can talk about fights with other countries, but mainly it's civil strife. The fights that happen within a country that happen because of religion, because of disagreements in politics, and because of different languages or people groups. So we're going to be talking not just about the United States as we did in the first segment. We're going to be talking about all of the different parts of the world that we've discussed previously. Now, it's important that when we see civil war break out in any country, that we first look at ourselves. As Americans, we need to know that very easily we could be in the same boat. Very easily our country could still be divided into two countries that are constantly at war with one another. So the perspective that we have as Americans comes from learning our own history and then making sure that we don't impose our ideas on other people. We need to begin this video on fights by talking about dynasties. And just as kings and queens ruled through the centuries in Egypt and China and even in the British Empire, it's true that even in democracies you can have leaders try to pass their power to their children. This happened in India. Now, again, you might right away say, wait a minute, in the United States, we had that happen too. We had John Adams and then John Quincy Adams. We had George H.W. Bush and then George W. Bush. So, we shouldn't throw stones if we live in glass houses. In India, Gandhi is a very important name. I want to make sure, though, you understand that we're going to be talking about a different Gandhi. Gandhi is a family name, just like Baden or Smith, and different people can have that family name. And so it's important that we don't get too confused. We're going to talk about Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi was not the daughter of Mahatma Gandhi. Indira Gandhi is the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru, you remember, was the first Prime Minister of India. He was working together with Gandhi in the Indian National Congress, but they did have disagreements about the partition of India and the nature of India. And Gandhi had hopes that were crushed, that were shattered, and eventually he was assassinated. Nehru continued. He served for a long time as Prime Minister. While he served as Prime Minister, his daughter actually became active in politics and worked as his secretary. And I don't mean in a traditional sexist sense that she was working in his office. She was actually rising through the Indian National Congress, and she was becoming a powerful political figure. Of course, she benefited from the connection with her father, there's no doubt. But she was a powerful speaker, a powerful leader, and she rose through the INC, which is the Indian National Congress, and she was seen as Nehru's heir apparent. And eventually, there was a new prime minister after Prime Minister Nehru, and his name was Prime Minister Shastri. And Shastri was controversial in many ways, and during that time, during his prime ministership, there was a war with Pakistan. It seems like there was always a war with Pakistan, but in 1965 there was a war. We'll discuss that in a little bit. But as a part of this war, he made decisions that people disagreed with. But ultimately, in 1966, he was a part of the peace process for that war. He went to the Soviet Union, and he died mysteriously. And so that's something we'll pick up a little bit later as well. I want you to know that there are a lot of things in history that we simply don't know the answer to. Could it be that he was killed by someone? The coincidence is very, very curious. So, Indira Gandhi, she had risen as a secretary and a cabinet minister. She had worked for Shastri as the Minister of Information and Broadcasting. That doesn't sound like a very important minister, but everyone saw that she was rising through the ranks. And then after Shastri's death, she became prime minister in the emergency election that happened. And she was a very strong prime minister, but she had enemies. By 1975, after another war with Pakistan and many decisions that people disagreed with, she declared a state of emergency. And this in India is known as the emergency. It was a huge time of suspension of civil rights, of freedoms in society. The freedom of speech, that was canceled. Things were censored. The freedom to assemble, you couldn't do that. There was basically martial law ruled by the military. And so there were many abuses. There were executions without proper trials. There were interrogations in prisons, and people were put in prison just for accusations or because of jealousies. And so the emergency lasted from 1975 to 1977. Gandhi kept extending the emergency. Again, she was making an excuse out of the fact that there might be terrorists, there might be enemies, Pakistan might attack us. And so this control of India was a part of her desire to maintain political power. Well, after 1977, she was confident in her popularity that she had restored order and kept India safe, and she called elections, and she lost. Not only did she lose the election, but she actually was arrested by the opposition, and that meant that immediately she lost her seat in parliament, and that's when kind of craziness broke out. And some of her supporters actually hijacked an airplane, an Indian Airlines airplane, and demanded that she be released from prison, and the charges dropped against her. And so that was happening. Eventually she was released from prison. And remarkably, in 1980, she was elected prime minister again. And when she was elected prime minister, again, she was a strong leader, and she made decisions. In particular, she attacked a temple where there were militants who were Sikhs. Sikhs are a portion of the population who are not Hindu and not Muslim. And so the Sikhs were outraged against her. Eventually, in 1984, there was so much opposition to her that her own bodyguards assassinated her. Incredible story. Now, before her death, she had only trusted her family because she had so many enemies because of what had happened in the emergency and other things. And her son, Rajiv, became active in politics. Eventually, he became prime minister, and he was assassinated as well. History repeats itself. We could go back to ancient Egypt. There were assassinations and conspiracies even back then. I'll leave it up to you to decide Gandhi's legacy, whether she was a good prime minister, a good leader or not. The BBC in 1999 elected her or chose her as the woman of the millennium. That's something else. And if you think about how she rose to power and how she maintained power as a woman, it is pretty remarkable. But we also need to look at the bad and weigh them in the balance. Okay, let's get into some more detail about the tensions, the conflicts between India and Pakistan. And I consider that to be a civil war that just keeps going on. Even though they are two separate countries, in fact, three separate countries now, it is a such a tragedy that that one India was broken up like that. And if we really think about it, our own United States could be facing the same situation with a confederacy. If the South had won the Civil War or had created a situation where the U.S., the North couldn't restore the Union. So why are India and Pakistan fighting? It's very complicated. It has to do with religion, but it also has to do with really one place, Kashmir. And the battle over Kashmir is actually Jammu and Kashmir, which is a province in India. So it's controlled by India, and it's also referred to as JK. So in JK, there are Muslims and there are Hindus, and it's a mixing that you have. And as a result, both countries wanted Kashmir, wanted JK, that area. And so what happened was first you had the first war of Kashmir right after the partition in 1947, 1948. After the British left and the partition happened, the two sides were battling over Kashmir. That's called the First Kashmir War. It wasn't widespread, and eventually it died down. But in 1965, there was a serious war, which lasted just a few days, but it was a case where Pakistan started trying to create an uprising in Kashmir so that the Muslims there would throw off their Indian rulers and would eventually become part of Pakistan. That was their plan. They called this Operation Gibraltar. It was this great name for a military movement. So operation means the military is moving into a battle. And you hear that a lot in the wars that are fought today. Operation this, operation that. Well, Operation Gibraltar refers to what happened in Spain, because Gibraltar, is a part of the tip of Spain, right across from Africa, and it actually was controlled by England for a long time, by Great Britain, which is confusing, but Gibraltar was where Arabs basically tried to infiltrate Spain. And so the idea for Pakistan is that just like the Arabs in Spain, that they would infiltrate Kashmir and Jammu, and they would try to create this uprising. So that was Operation Gibraltar. It was a glorious failure, and it led to India retaliating, and it led to the biggest tank battles since World War II. And on one side, you had the Pakistani tanks, which were U.S. Patton tanks. On the other side, you had French tanks, which weren't as strong. And so you had these massive tank battles. And again, even though Pakistan had started this, India was ultimately more powerful. And it led to a stalemate. And there was finally an agreement in 1966. A conference in Tashkent, which is today in Uzbekistan. It was a part of the Soviet Union at that time, and so the Soviets, the Russians, were the ones who were the peacemakers. And it was during that conference that the Prime Minister of India died. So Prime Minister Shastri just died mysteriously, and there's speculation. There's thinking that maybe he was poisoned. By who? Hard to say, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And so even though there was peace, no one was really satisfied, especially India, because there was no statement that there could never be another war. But the Soviets were very happy with themselves, as the United States is when they think that there's peace. Like in North Korea, today we hear the government of the United States talking about how there is peace now in Korea, and not really. So there's this relationship between India and Pakistan and the Soviet Union, and obviously the U.S. is going to be concerned about that. As you might have guessed, this peace didn't last. In 1971, there was a second war, and basically it was all about East Pakistan. You need to remember there was an East Pakistan and a West Pakistan, which was much larger. Many millions of people live in these regions, in both regions. And remember that East Pakistan was Bengal, and it was called East Bengal because West Bengal was a part of India. That was a part of the partition. East Bengal had far more Muslims than Hindus. That's why the British said, okay, we will make Pakistan the two parts. Now, in this case, there was an uprising in East Pakistan, and it was kind of spurred on by the Indian government because they wanted to divide Pakistan. They didn't want East Pakistan and West Pakistan surrounding them. And so they wanted East Pakistan to be independent and maybe friendly to India. And so there was this uprising for independence. And of course, West Pakistan said, no, we're not going to allow you to break away. There had been a long disagreement about how to govern because obviously both parts feel that they are the most important part. And so what ended up happening is the military from West Pakistan went into East Pakistan. They flew over and they were invading. And during that time, the war for an independent Bangladesh began. So Bangladesh is Bengal, and Bangladesh is what it's called today. And this is important. It was the beginning of Bangladesh or Bangladesh. And what happened is when the Pakistani Army Air Force started their attacks on East Pakistan, which was Bangladesh, they also attacked India. And so the airstrikes in India actually were trying to keep India out of Pakistani business. And it failed again miserably. And India then intervened and became a part of this civil war between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And this was really another way for Indira Gandhi to say, India is the main power here, not either part of the Pakistan government. It's India that will control South Asia. And this war lasted 13 days only, but it was devastating, especially in East Pakistan, in Bangladesh. And there were incredible, terrible atrocities committed by the Pakistani army. They saw those East Pakistani people, the Bangladeshi people, as traitors, and they committed horrible, horrible crimes. Thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of women were sexually assaulted. And this is an incredible atrocity that happened. It has happened in other wars, and it's just important that we recognize that these kinds of things have happened in history. In addition, 10 million Bangladeshi people had to leave to go into India because they were the minority group. They were Hindu rather than Muslim, and you had even 10 times as many people killed. We still don't know if it was 300,000 or 3 million people killed. There's no way to know. The communication at that time was much different than it is today. Now, to understand this civil strife, this civil war that has happened in South Asia, between India and Pakistan and in Bangladesh, we need to know about Hindutva. Hindutva is this nationalist movement, this idea of Hindu-ness, that it was a movement that started in the 1920s as a part of the as a part of the independence movement against the British Empire. And it seems like it's a positive thing, you know, knowing who you are. But the thing is, all people in India weren't Hindus. There were Sikhs, there were Muslims, there were many, many different groups of people. And so basically this Hindutva movement is saying we as a country will become Hindu. And it would be like in the United States for us to force everyone to be Christian, or to force everyone to eat the same foods and to wear the same clothing, that kind of thing. And this actually started with a language movement, and every group in India, there were hundreds of languages, and every group wanted to have their own language spoken in their local schools and in their government. And the thing is, that created chaos, and it also created conflicts. One party that was created in 1980 was the BJP, and the BJP is a very important party to know today because it has to do with Indian independence and Hindutva. So the current Prime Minister Modi is a part of this party, and just so you know, BJP stands for Bharatiya Janata Party. Bharatiya Janata Party. And so this party has gained power. They are the largest political party in the world, and they are the largest party, the most popular party in India because of the number of seats in parliament that they control. Officially, India said that they were going to have a secular government, and this was to keep religion from tearing people apart. But it has not been successful in every case at getting rid of sectarianism. So secular means everybody focuses on what you have in common. Secular, and religion is kept out of things. And sectarianism has to do with religion. It has to do with language and things like that. When people break apart into sects, S-E-C-T-S. Okay? We need to go back to Salman Rushdie, the writer, the Indian writer who has chronicled, who has written about India's history. First, in 1979, he published Midnight's Children. It's considered one of the greatest books ever written in English, and it is the story of everything that I've talked about, from partition, actually, Indian independence, partition, the Pakistani, the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971, all the atrocities that were committed, all of that is wrapped up in Midnight's Children, which is this story of superhero children that experience all these kind of crazy things in the world. And that is just a reflection of what happened in real life. Well, Salman Rushdie actually wrote another book called The Satanic Verses. Now, again, Christians wouldn't understand that, but just Satan in the Arabic language means adversary. It doesn't mean the devil as we know. And so the Satanic Verses are a certain portion of the Quran that's not accepted, and it had to do with polytheism. So I won't get into a lot of that. But because Salman Rushdie wrote this book, many Muslims in the world who were extreme in their beliefs, they wanted him dead. They wanted to kill him, and Iran in particular issued a decree that he should be murdered. Well, he had to flee, of course, and he gained freedom and asylum, safety in the UK. He has continued to write. But the reason I mention this is because he has written about this Hindutva movement, and he hasn't said good things about it. And so it's not just Muslims who don't like him, it's also Hindus who have been very unhappy with him. Now, there's another writer, and his name is V.I. Naipaul. V.I. Naipaul was an award-winning author, again, a great writer, but he has taken the side of Hindutva, and he has spoken out that Hindutva and Hinduism, Hindu-ness is an important thing to promote as a government. And so you can see that even these people who should be our referees and the people who should observe what we're doing wrong and write about it to help us be better. Sometimes you have people on both sides. You have Salman Rushdie on one side and you have V.I. Naipaul on the other side. So that is a complicated mess, even in the world of writing. Finally, very quickly, I want to talk to you about India and Pakistan and their relationships with other countries. Both countries were supported by the Soviet Union after the partition, and the U.S. had its hands full in Korea and then Vietnam, and so there is very much a sense that the Soviet Union, the Soviets, were expanding their influence and were trying to influence both India and Pakistan. The problem was that those two countries hated each other. They both had a form of socialist government at various times. And again, that sounds like something that would be more on the Soviet side than on the US capitalist side. And it was because of this religious tension that Pakistan and India were not able to be together. And what ended up happening is the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and Pakistan could not stand that, could not tolerate that. And there was a group called the Mujahideen. Osama bin Laden, famous terrorist of 9/11, he was one of the Mujahideen, and the U.S. supported Pakistan and supported those rebels against the Soviets. It was a part of the Cold War. And at the same time, India was clearly a Soviet ally. So Pakistan became a U.S. ally, and India was a Soviet ally until about 1990, when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union broke up. Then India has moved closer to the United States and has had more of a capitalist system. And today, the relations between the U.S. and India are quite strong, but the relations between India and Russia are also quite strong. And so, in some ways, India has been the one that has economically flourished. Pakistan, not so much. They have been racked by terrorism and by corruption, and leaders being assassinated there as well. So, that is a complicated story. Hopefully you can see that it's still about civil war. It's about fights, some of them good, some of them bad. Hopefully you can decide for yourselves which are which. Thanks for watching.